Who would be more important for the Washington Commanders to bring back in 2024? Kendall Fuller or Kamren Curl? That is just one question that I'm answering on this mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And you can continue the conversation with me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to sign up today. And from there, you'll get live text messages from me one-on-one with conversations about news, analysis, the draft, free agency, pretty much just anything and everything that you want to discuss Washington Commanders. So much cool stuff going on there. Bonus content coming down all the time. So again, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Go beyond the show and exchange one-on-one text messages with me, your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media, covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, I appreciate your continued support for the program. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, we are diving into the mailbag. We're going to talk a little bit about Eric Bieniemy. We're going to talk about some offseason goings on around the team, in the team, with the team, things coming up. But first, we are going to start with a question from Daniel that is going to get me in all kinds of trouble. Daniel, insider Daniel, don't know what I did to you, buddy, but Daniel asked me, if you were Adam Peters, the Washington Commanders general manager, would you rather retain Kendall Fuller or Cam Curl or find a replacement in free agency, and how stacked this class is in free agency, with how stacked this class is? If free agency, who do you think are the best choices out there? So Daniel, this question obviously came in a little bit before before our position group preview for the offseason of the secondary group. And we talked about safeties, we talked about the cornerbacks, all that stuff, and really kind of took the angle of it that, without re-signing players, we identified players that certainly could be re-signed, but didn't really make a statement on who would be re-signed. So Daniel really asked me, would you rather retain Kendall and Cam Curl, right? But to me, I kind of looked at this as a one or the other. So maybe it's not Daniel really getting me in trouble. It's more so my own interpretation of the question getting me in trouble. But if I had to pick between Kendall Fuller and Kamren Curl in a vacuum, I would go Kamren Curl. I think Kamren Curl, his versatility, he's got coverage ability, he's got box safety abilities, certainly has shown to have some talent in both areas. Again, going back to yesterday's episode, we talked about Pro Football Focus, really kind of analyzing Kamren Curl as a guy who's really good at multiple things, but not necessarily great at any one specific part of his game. And I think that's a fairly accurate statement on Kamren Curl's game. But I think that you also shouldn't underestimate someone who's good at everything that you ask him to do on the football field, right? And then on the other side of things, you've got Kendall Fuller, the cornerback. And when I look at the Washington Commanders and the state that the Commanders are in, I actually think I would keep Kendall Fuller over Kamren Curl. And again, if you could bring both back, I think there's certainly value to doing that. And certainly the team has enough money. But I do think that there is a potential. I don't think Kendall Fuller is coming back, just to be fully upfront. I don't have any inside information or, team source confirmation on that. It's just kind of a gut feeling. So certainly could be wrong, but my feeling is I don't think Kendall Fuller is coming back. Cam Curl, I think, is interesting. And I think that his odds of coming back go down every single day we get closer to the start of the new league year, or at least the start of the open negotiating period, because I don't think that if both sides of this, I don't think if Cam Curl hits free agency, that he ends up coming back to Washington. And honestly, I think that if Washington goes into free agency, goes into the open negotiating period, being able to talk to the plethora of safeties that are available on the market, I don't think that Cam Curl gets the number that maybe he's asking for from the team either. So I think on both sides of this thing, it kind of serves both. If Washington wants Cam and Cam wants to be in Washington, it serves them both to get the deal done before Monday and the open negotiating period beginning. So that's just kind of how I look at it. You know what I mean? And the reason I would go personally Kendall Fuller over Cam Curl in this situation really is how deep the free agent class is for the safety specifically, not so much the cornerbacks. Because when you look at maybe the top 3 safeties that most people would consider, especially with the news that has come down Thursday, Justin Simmons from the Denver Broncos, all pro caliber, Pro Bowl caliber free safety, has been or is going to be released. I'm not sure if it's actually officially official. Xavier McKinney from the New York Giants, again, not tagged. He is transition tagged, but not to the extent that the Washington Commanders or anybody else that signs him would have to give the Giants any draft capital. When you look at their potential impact of trying to re-sign Saquon Barkley, the fact they only have $38 million in cap space, the fact that $10 million of that is needed for design their own draft class, really you're talking $28 million. If you're the Washington Commanders and you really want Xavier McKinney, then I think you come in with a deal that is heavily front-loaded. You pay him a lot of his guarantees up front, because then you basically put the Giants in a position where they have to eat a lot of their own cap space in order to keep Xavier McKinney. And then if they don't, then the Washington Commanders walk away with him, or even Budda Baker, a guy in Arizona who a lot of people have kind of forgotten about with the struggles that the Arizona Cardinals have gone through, but certainly has still been one of the better free safeties in the NFL. So a really, and those are just the top 3. So a really good safety group. We didn't even mention Cam Curl in that mix, but you also have some other guys like Darnell Savage who come over and be a free safety from the Green Bay Packers. Looking at the cornerback class, I think Adoree Jackson is probably the most exciting in my book here, but there's certainly a lot of questions about him, how effective he can be, how effective he would be. J.C. Jackson is a guy that, really balled out in New England a couple years ago, went to the Chargers on a big deal, flamed out there, went back to the Pats, and it's not like he necessarily went back to like all-pro form with the Patriots. Jeff Okudah is a guy that I thought was going to be really great coming out of Ohio State. It's kind of, I would say bounced around. He went from the Lions to the Falcons, but now he's going to be a free agent. So, I mean, the cornerback free agent class, not as sexy as the safety class. And I think that there is good talent in the NFL draft in the cornerback group in the first 1 to 5 rounds, maybe really the first 4 rounds. So if I'm the Washington Commanders, I think I'd rather dip my toe. If I had to dip my toe into one of the free agent pools, I'd rather go after a safety in free agency like Justin Simmons or Budda Baker or Xavier McKinney or Darnell Savage. And then I did go into the NFL draft looking to add cornerback depth, maybe with one of those 2nd round picks, or maybe with my early 3rd round pick, depending on how the board falls and all those things. And I might do a little bit of both, in both these plays. I might go after a free agent, free safety, and maybe spend like a 6th rounder on a safety. Cornerback group could maybe go after a free agent like, say, Jeff Okudah, who certainly still has athletic ability. Maybe he just needs the right fit. You bring him in there to kind of compete with those other top guys, and then maybe go in the NFL draft and go grab myself a 3rd rounder and just look at it and kind of say between Emmanuel Forbes, Benjamin St-Juste, Jeff Okudah, and the rookie to be announced later. Someone's got to pay it out, right? Like you would hope. If not, you get Jeff Okudah on a 1-year deal. The rookie the 3rd round rookie is not expensive no matter what year he's in. Benjamin St-Juste is a free agent next year if you don't like him. Emmanuel Forbes is still on a rookie deal, so relatively cheap. So I mean, again, you're not putting a lot of money in there. So if it doesn't work out with any of the 4, then you still have the ability to necessarily kind of go away from there. So that's why I say I would go, if I had the Washington Commanders, I would go Kendall Fuller over Cam Curl. Just if I had to go one or the other. Again, Daniel asked about each individually, so I think that answered that. But I also took it a step further and kind of put myself on the spot to go with one or the other. So again, not Daniel's fault, certainly my own fault, but I think it was a really interesting question. You know what? Who doesn't like a conversation of having to pick or choose one or the other? I just hope that all the Cam Curl fans out there don't come for my throat here. So good way to open up the mailbag. We got more questions specifically about the offseason process, players visiting, draft ideas, a lot of other things coming up for this offseason here for the Washington Commanders. That's coming up next on today's mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. So this offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% match on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC. Member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. Continuing on now, in today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Everydayers, come back tomorrow. We are going to wrap up our offensive position group preview. We're going to do running backs and tight ends. So come back for that tomorrow. That's right. Tomorrow, Saturday, we will have a bonus episode going out to everybody, not just the insiders. So just a special kind of bonus for everybody. Locked On has also launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with your local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Insiders, don't worry, you're still getting your own bonus content. All that quarterback interview footage that I've been talking to you about in these text messages, that is finally going to come through, and we are going to drop that Saturday for insiders along with the bonus episode for everybody. So lots of good stuff coming down here on the channel. Moving in our mailbag episode today, Bill came through and said, I'd be interested in offseason visits by team members. Do they stop by to work out? Are they allowed to use film at stadium or workout facilities? What NFLPA rules come into play when they want to talk to coaches, etc.? So here's the most basic way I can lay down what I understand about the offseason rules before the offseason programs begin, which is obviously this time, like right now, right from the end of the regular season, the end of the postseason, whatever your team is eliminated, to the beginning of your offseason workout programs. Right now, basically players have access to the team facility as long as they're under contract. So if they're under contract, they're allowed to visit the team facility. So like Charles Leno Jr. up until the day he was released could visit the team facility. Now that he's been released, can no longer visit the team facility. So that's why you hear like Adam Peters says that, he had a conversation with Sam Howell. Sam Howell visited the facility. They walked around the compound a little bit, had a little bit of a conversation. Coach Quinn said he was able to catch up with Sam Howell and have some conversations with him, but none of it can be like coaching. None of it can be like, hey, here's what I need you to do. Hey, here's, how we're going to install this play. Hey, here's a check that I want you to learn. Nothing like that. It can be like, hey, how you doing? I'm me, you're you. What are personal interests and things like that? They can certainly have conversations. They just cannot have any coaching or development or any call it official business, right? As far as like working out, like the players are allowed to use the workout facilities, are allowed to use the training facilities. The only coach that really is supposed to be around them when they're doing this kind of stuff is the strength coach. And that's more of a safety precaution. It's not so much like hey, we need to increase your deep ball, so do this kind of workout. It's more so just making sure the equipment is being used properly and the supervision is there. So that's kind of why that is there. But they can do, like aerobics and like basically anything that's considered like therapeutic and stuff like that in the facility. Now, as far as like film and all that stuff, the team is allowed to submit film and like cut ups and overlays of plays and all this stuff to players via hard drives or iPads and all this other stuff. And those overlays and those videos can actually have like voiceover and stuff like that. So in that kind of sense, there is a little bit, but you cannot put a mandatory, like, if I'm Coach Kingsbury, I can't send Terry McLaurin a reel of 100 plays and say, hey, Terry, here's a reel of 100 plays. By the end of the week, I want you to know all of them. Get back to me and let me know. Like you could say, hey, Terry, here's a reel of 100 plays. If you want to, go ahead and dive into it or whatever it is. Like you can't really force it. So if that makes sense. So that's really kind of the crux of what they're allowed to do at this point in the season. And I will tell you that, I'm not going to say exactly who, but every time we go to the facility, whether it's for an introductory press conference or something else, I do see player vehicles parked in the player parking lot. So there are certainly guys in there, some are doing rehab and other things, but certainly people in there. So hopefully that answers that question. Frank came through, asked, how aggressive do you think the Commanders will be in free agency? Really aggressive, big time signings all around, moderately aggressive, one or two big signings with a lot of other role players, not aggressive, signing mostly role players, or save the money until next year and focus on the draft. So I think I go kind of in the moderately aggressive category. I think one or two big names is certainly possible. I think maybe one of these more well-established offensive line, players, and maybe, again, I've made no secret about it. My favorite free agent in this class right now is Patrick Queen, linebacker from the Baltimore Ravens. I would not hate at all seeing this team try to go get him and pair him with Jamin Davis. Use Jamin as a rush linebacker. Use Patrick Queen as more of a coverage type of guy. Your Mike linebacker, and then maybe go get another guy either in later free agency or go get a guy in the NFL draft like a Peyton Wilson or a Jeremiah Trotter to be kind of that third linebacker in development. So that's kind of a preferential thing. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, no matter, whether it's like one really big guy or two somewhat big guys or throw a bunch of smaller guys, I think you're probably looking at this team spending about 30 to 40% of its available cap. And I say available cap because right now over the cap has Washington Commanders sitting about $91.5 million in cap space. And when you take off $10 million for the draft class that's coming up, you're really left with $81.5 million, which is still very, very good. 30 to 40% of 81.5% would be anywhere from $24.4 million to $32.6 million, which is a good amount of money. And that would leave you at least $48.9 million on this year's cap remaining. And that's something you would use, to replace a guy, if, injuries happen. So you got to go out and sign this other veteran or something like that. But I think you end up eventually, and then you see the Washington Commanders basically sit after the draft class, after free agency, so starting, say, training camp, regular season, somewhere probably around $45 to $50 million left in cap space. I think it's important because in 2025, right, we kind of talked about Benjamin St-Juste specifically, but Sam Cosmi is scheduled to be a free agent in 2025. Jamin Davis, Benjamin St-Juste, De'Ami Brown, John Bates, Derek Forrest, all scheduled to be free agents in 2025. And, some of those guys like John Bates, De'Ami Brown, probably not going to be like top dollar guys anyway. But, Jamin Davis, again, I expect him to decline his fifth-year option, which means he would be a free agent next year, potentially. And, if he balls out, maybe you want to franchise tag him to see if you can get that same production out of him before you actually pay him. I don't know that, he can really go that high, but, you want to leave some money for the what ifs of the world. And Sam Cosmi is a guy that honestly, look, most new regimes, they kind of want to get to know a guy before they go offer him new contracts. But Sam Cosmi through Washington Commanders, I think Sam Cosmi is a guy that maybe you go after and you try to re-sign him. So you could see, like, say, a Patrick Queen, a free agent lineman signed. That's not maybe like the biggest deal in the world, but then you see them re-sign Sam Cosmi to a new deal, kind of lock him down. I wouldn't hate necessarily seeing that. So that's kind of how I see the Washington Commanders approaching the offseason. Fran, Billy came through. The Commanders have the second pick in the draft. Why don't they have the second pick in rounds 2 and 3? It's the same for round 5 and 6. So the reason for that is because the Commanders, the Patriots, and the Cardinals basically finished all, with the same records. Now the Commanders obviously won tiebreakers, but the way some of the tiebreakers work is they lead to a rotation. So what you see here is in the first round, the Commanders get the high pick, then the Patriots get the next pick, then the Cardinals got the third pick. In that trio. And then in the second round, the Patriots have the first pick of the trio, then the Cardinals and the Commanders. Third round, the Cardinals have the first pick, the Commanders have the second, the Patriots have the third. And then again in the fourth round, Commanders first, Patriots second, Cardinals third, and so on and so forth. So that's the reason they have it. It's just one of the rules with the tiebreakers. Basically say, look, all three of you guys finish, basically the same. So in order to kind of try to even it out as much as possible, we're going to rotate. Obviously, in this sense, you want that top pick in the first round more than anything else. Look, you see the Commanders at number 2. If the Patriots had number 2, they'd be getting the quarterback of their choice as it is now. If they have like one guy that they love out of this group, they got to trade up with either the Bears or the Commanders to get them. Whereas, they could be left with their number 3 quarterback, which could still work out, certainly, but not advantageous. The Cardinals, if they had the number 2 overall pick, man, they'd be looking to sell, right? They'd be looking to sell that thing to either the third or the fourth pick, the Commanders or the Patriots, and trying to get a bounty for that. So the Cardinals really would love to have that number 2 overall pick because they would basically be sellers probably flat out. I think they might love Marvin Harrison Jr., but if you can, trade back one spot and still get him at pick number 3 while moving back for number 2, I think you probably take advantage of that. So that's why it's just one of the rules that comes with some of the tiebreakers out there is that you basically are lumped into a group. In this situation, it's a group of 3, the Commanders, Pats, and the Cardinals, and they essentially rotate as the draft goes on. So that's why the Commanders have the first pick of those 3 in the first round, and then again in the fourth round. But then the second, third, fifth, and sixth, they either have the second or the third, depending on where they are in the rotation. So some offseason information, data, ideas coming up in the mailbag, or coming out in the mailbag episode. Coming up next, we got a question about Eric Bieniemy. I know he's gone, but why is he gone? That is a question we're going to answer coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Game Time, who says you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. And Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Better yet, they have last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, all kinds of stuff, cancellation protection, job loss protection, all of it. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. And Game Time Even has deals on some tickets right up to the start of the event or even an hour after it starts. Bottom line is it is the place for you to find last-minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, today's mailbag episode with a question off of YouTube. This YouTube listener viewer wants to know why Eric Bieniemy was passed over as a head coach or an offensive coordinator in the NFL after his first year as a true offensive coordinator. Was it true that he wasn't liked in the locker room or wasn't liked by the ownership? Just curious. Wasn't a fan of his play calling, this YouTube user says, so I'm not surprised that he wasn't picked up for another year. Seems like Coach Quinn had his coordinators all picked out prior to his hiring. All his right as head coach, wondering how the rest of the position coaches are picked. Do they get picked by the GM or head coach, or do the coordinators get to pick them as well? So really solid question. And, I don't want to make this about, kicking Eric Bieniemy. He's gone. He's no longer with the team. There's no reason to really kind of harp on it. So I hope that's not the intent of the question, which I don't believe it was, which is why I'm answering it. But the bottom line is, look, I think that when you look at Eric Bieniemy, so where did Eric Bieniemy fall short? I think where Eric Bieniemy fell short is really putting too much on Sam Howell, right? Putting too much on just a young quarterback. I think he had a very effective run game that he didn't use as much as he probably should have. I think that some of his offensive linemen would have benefited more from getting more run plays peppered in there. Because again, it's not just as simple as saying, well, this offensive lineman can't block, pass protect to save his life. There is, a mitigating factor here of defenses know that you're going to pass, X amount of times, or that you're going to go pass heavy and when you're trailing and all this stuff, and it affects how they approach you, and it affects how defensive coordinators attack your protection and the things that they can do. They can afford to kind of take a little bit more time and take some more risks against your offensive line. That certainly influences things. That's not to say that any of these guys would have been like a Pro Bowler or an All-Pro had it not been for the overuse of the pass. I'm just saying that the overuse of the pass certainly made not great offensive line look worse than it maybe was, right? So to keep that in comparison. Also, again, just the pressure that you put on the young quarterback. Again, I've said it here on the show every day, as you'll remember. Sam Howell absolutely hit a wall, in my opinion, at one point in the season. Some have said that who agreed they made that wall happen on Thanksgiving. I think that wall actually hit him, or he hit that wall against the New York Giants the second time around. We can debate that until we're blue in the face. Doesn't really matter. As far as whether or not he was liked, I can tell you that some players didn't like him. Some of the players did like him. Some of the players just accepted him. Right. I think that's really kind of the crux of all leadership styles, right? Like, you can have any type of leadership style in a group, especially a group that big. You're talking about a lot of guys in the locker room, a lot of guys on an NFL roster and NFL staff. And some guys are going to love your leadership style. Some guys are going to hate your leadership style. And some guys are going to just deal with your leadership style. I don't think there's any one leader, even look like I get a guy like Dan Quinn. Like, I promise you, there's a player out there that would never play for Dan Quinn again if they had the opportunity. Same goes for Cliff. Same goes for Joe Witt. But then there are guys who would absolutely die to play for those guys again. You look at Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz certainly obviously has no problem playing for Cliff Kingsbury again. But maybe Kyler Murray probably wouldn't be in the same boat, right? So I think that, there's a lot more to go into, like, do I like somebody, do I not like somebody, versus things like that. So, overall, was he loved? Was he loved in the locker room? I think it's hard to love any one person when you're not having success. You know what I mean? So, I don't know if that's really a fair way to answer the question, but I'll just tell you, it's not like the last day of the season, people were just running him out of the stadium. You know what I mean? And just as a person, like Eric Bieniemy, had a lot of conversations with him off the record, just, man to man, was certainly a good guy to get to know, even if it was just only for one season. And personally, the biggest disappointment I had with Eric Bieniemy as an offensive coordinator was honestly some of the things that he said in his introductory press conference, some of the things that we were told in training camp, some of the things that we saw installed in training camp, we did not see come to life in the regular season. That's kind of the biggest disappointing for me, is when you hear someone kind of say all the right things, but then they don't really follow up with what they're saying. And that's why, with all this stuff we're hearing from Dan Quinn and Joe Witt and Cliff Kingsbury and these position coaches, I just kind of take it all with a grain of salt. Like, it's if you hear any of my like DC radio, appearances or anything like that, like people ask me like, how excited am I about this coaching staff? And I'll just tell people like, look, they're saying all the right things right now. I'll get excited when things are going well on the field. Doesn't mean I don't feel some excitement. Doesn't mean I don't enjoy the hype. I'm a big hype season guy. I think that, everybody should kind of steer into hype season, especially those of us who really don't have an impact on what happens on the field. Like enjoy the hype while it's there. So I certainly enjoy it, but I think that we should, if you're going to get to the point where you're like, well, Coach Quinn's gonna be the next Joe Gibbs. Like we're not there yet. You know what I mean? I don't think that's where we should go. As far as coordinators, yeah, Coach Quinn, a lot of times I can't speak for everybody. I wasn't in the interview room with Josh Harris and Adam Peters and all that stuff, but I can tell you that just from talking to people who have been part of hiring processes or through hiring processes in the past, like typically if you're interviewing a head coach, you're asked, who's your staff? Right? Like who do you have in mind to flesh out your staff and why and stuff like that. So certainly, if not all of these coaches, a lot of these coaches were named by Dan Quinn as guys like, hey, here's the band that I'm bringing with me. It's not just me. Here's the crew. But certainly coordinators will have some choices or have some influence on who they hire. And some of those conversations, like, look, Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. probably sat up nights sometimes, on the road, especially. And we're like, hey, man, like if I ever got this choice, if I ever got the opportunity to be head coach, I want you to be my DC. And Joe Witt is sitting there like, yeah, man, hey, we also need to bring this guy along. We need to bring that guy along. I know this dude from over here. Oh, man, hey, I know Ken Norton Jr. from Seattle, bro. We need to bring him too. Like, these conversations kind of happen, whether it's like laid out all ahead of time officially on paper. I can't tell you that. But, it's just like any other business. Like, whatever business you're in, you look around your office, you're like, man, if I was running this place, here's who would be my second in command. Here's who would be my third. Here's who I would hire from the outside. Like we all kind of play those games to a certain extent. I think it's almost like winning the lottery. Like who hasn't planned how to spend their lottery winnings? Well, same thing. If you have the aspirations to be the guy in charge or the gal in charge of whatever business you're in, you've had kind of those conversations, internal dialogues of who you would bring with you. So hopefully that answers that question. Really good answer. Again, wish Eric Bieniemy all the best. I certainly know, again, if you pay attention to social media, you see it yourselves. Some of the Commanders players certainly wishing Eric Bieniemy the best themselves as well as they move on. He moves on to UCLA. So if you are an Eric Bieniemy fan and you want to keep up with him, he's now coaching at UCLA, so you can watch him this coming college football season. Thanks to everybody for your mailbag submissions. Again, tomorrow we will have a bonus episode, tight ends and running backs, to wrap up our offensive preview for the offseason. And then Monday we will drop a defensive line edge group preview. That'll drop Monday. And then Monday, of course, the madness begins with the opening of the open negotiating period for the NFL. That's all coming up. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, just throw them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly as a Locked On Commanders insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever live 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, sports channel on YouTube. As always, thanks for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time with another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.